Okay, so in this second video we'll be doing the final touches on the main body texture. Now the engine is mostly finished. I might need to do a few more tweaks on the speculars here. And as you can see, I'm just duplicating the oil layer from the previous video. If I duplicate this in the specular layer, it just makes it stronger. It's a little trick I do to increase the strength. I just saved that, and yeah, it's becoming a little bit more obvious that those areas are dirty. And once again, you have to make sure that you add these details into the specular map strong enough, or you won't see their effect so much. Now, what I can see here is the inside of the exhaust, which should be somewhere over there, is too bright. It's still reflecting too much specular, so I just made that a little bit darker, saving it again. And right now I'm just going to move those little polygons over there. As you can see, these were unwrapped on some other location, so I'm just moving them over to a spot where it's pitch black and I won't have any problems with the specular with them anymore. That looks okay. So with that done, we can look for the next area to work on. And at the front of the car here, we might need to add a little bit more detail. I'm thinking that the grille at the front there might need a little bit more work. I think the steering wheel is okay. We don't need to do much more on that. And one thing that's really bothering me here at the back is the fuel tank. The fuel tank really doesn't look too detailed or realistic to me, so we're going to have to get back to that as well. So again, I'm doing a slight adjustment to the unwraps here. I'm just trying to figure out how it's going to work with this part. Yeah, there's a rubber hose that runs from the radiator to the cooling system of the car, and that needs to be darker rubber. So what I'm doing is I'm just changing the color on that. See this hose? It looks like it's metal, but it's supposed to be a rubber, so I just changed that to black. And then I'm using a slight dirt brush to paint some highlights on this thing. As you can see, I wasn't really smart with the placement of my seam, but for something like this it shouldn't be too difficult to get the seam to look right. So there you go, looks about okay. So now I've created a new dust layer here. Looking for the right brush here, and for dust of course I take this beige color, and then I'm just looking for the right brush. These are the E3D brushes. Testing them out a little bit, and yeah, that looks okay, but maybe this one's better. I want to add this sort of light dusty layer on top of things. It can't be too solid, there still has to be some texture in there. So I'm just picking some of them here and seeing what they do. This really is just looking for the right one. It's a bit hard, but I think this one's okay. I know this is hard to see in this video, the subtle details of this brush, but you want to make sure your brush doesn't cover things too much, or doesn't leave speckles that don't really look like dirt. So I think this one should be right. Alright, so the frame, since of course it is close to the ground, will have dust sticking to it. So I'm just adding sort of beige dust layer on top here. And as you can see the brush preview there, that does look like dirt and dust. So right now just painting over it, changing the colors a bit so it works. And I'm really thinking about when I paint this that it should be at the bottom of the car, because the dust won't fly to the top of the car. The dust will stick to the bottom, to the parts that are close to the ground and to the road, where dust will accumulate more than in other areas. This is the sort of, the dry dust that you can wipe off of your car. It's not the grime that's really sticking into corners and the hidden areas. It's this sort of light surface dust that sort of sits everywhere. There you go, just adding a little bit of that everywhere. Gotta make sure to erase it on places where it shouldn't be, like on those lights. I really want to keep this at the bottom of the car only. So all the places that sit at the bottom of the car, I'm just going over these. The exhaust will have some of it too, so I'm just lightly spraying that on a little bit. The front, the leaf springs at the front will also have some. And changing the opacity of the layer a little bit. And then, of course, I have to take that layer and add it into the specular. I don't want it to affect things too much, but it's got to be visible. So there we go, I saved those two layers. And yeah, you can see the texture that it's added to the total of the car. That looks okay. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is something a little bit unorthodox. I said that the rear tank is bothering me, and one thing that's bothering me is there is no fuel cap. I have to be honest, I forgot about this. So I'm just simply going to add this in on a later moment after after all the unwrapping is done. I'm just going to add some more geometry. Now this really isn't a problem. I'll just show you guys what you have to keep in mind when you do something like this. First of all, I'm just going to model this, deleting the polygons I don't need, just modeling this the way that everybody would do it. Not making it too complex, it just has to be a simple fuel cap at the top. Auto smooth everything. Then I'm going to unwrap it separately. I'm not going to attach it yet, I'm just going to unwrap it first. And this unwrapping looks really bad, so I have to fix that first. I need to align these. This is a really easy unwrapping job. I mean, with all the tips you should have gotten in the unwrapping part of the hot rod, this sort of stuff should be a breeze. Turn off normalize map. Scale that down again. There we go. Also straighten those edges out. And these two round parts. There we go, that should be okay for unwrapping. And I'm just going to add it there at the top. I know I made that area black just a minute ago, but I don't have to keep it black. And it's close to the fuel tank. And also, most importantly, it's an empty area on my UVs. There are still some empty spots. I couldn't fill everything out perfectly. But in this case, that works because I need to add some more to the texture here. So I'm also going to make a high poly for this fuel cap because I think that will be worth it. That's one of the reasons I kept a split in the UVs, because there will be hard edges there, and it's going to work with the normal maps. If there were no normal maps, I would have unwrapped it a little bit differently. So I'm just going to pull this one up a little bit, make that one slightly round. Alright, just copy my Turbo Smooth and paste it, and there we go, that looks like a nice fuel cap. So back to my render, and I'm just going to switch from V-Ray, which I use for the ambient occlusion, to my scanline renderer, turn on the correct samplers, and then just do the same normal map baking dance that we've done all the time. And pick the right one. Just perform a slight push. check if that is working. And I'm just going to add a slight adjustment to the low poly here, because I think this is going to work better with the normal map baking if I give it a slight bulge on the top. Actually, it's a pointy end, but it's going to work way better with normal map baking. Yeah, and of course, as you can see, the UV is a little bit destroyed then. I gotta fix that, but it won't be hard. Just detach, do a planar map, and scale it back down. There we go, just place it there. There we are. Okay, then just perform the push a little bit further, and then add a normal map element, set it to 2048, bake the correct folder, and here we go, rendering, done. LP fuel cap normal map. We're going to do that same trick we've been doing all the time. Well, having a little look here, and it looks like there are some problems with the baking. As you can see, there's that sort of dotted pattern. I'm just going to fix that up manually. Same here. It looks so much cleaner if you do that. And do the same thing in the normalizing channel. Yep, there we are. Alright, that looks good. Duplicate the layer, duplicate it to the correct PSD file. Close this, then take this layer and dump it into the normals folder. Name it fuel cap. Now I just gotta hide my diffuse, and then I can save these normals. Saving them as miscnormals.tga. And with that done, I can hide the high poly stuff, and I can just assign the shader to this part. And one thing that's a little bit of a problem is it's still black now, so it's a little bit hard for me to see. And it looks like, yeah, I was a little bit sloppy with the positioning of the UVs. There's one thing really annoying about Max. If I turn on a texture, it does this pixel snap thing. I absolutely hate that, but I haven't found out how to change that. And look at that. That looks about okay. Just gonna rotate it slightly so that the seams are hidden. Okay, now I just gotta color that part and then add some more detail to the rest of the fuel tank. One thing I'm gonna need for the color is the ambient occlusion, of course, is going to change. Now I'm not sure if I'm going to bake that or if I'm going to just paint that manually, since after all it's just a dot. So who cares? Alright, my UV template has changed, so I'm saving that. And I'm replacing the old UV template with the new one, like that. Okay. And I'm making this part white in the ambient occlusion, and I'm just manually going to paint in the ambient occlusion. I think it's not worth painting it, so I'm actually painting on my ambient occlusion channel, which is set to multiply already, and I'm using a black brush to paint in where there will be shadows. Very easy, actually, nothing too complicated. There we go. And right now I need to remove a part of this fuel tank color here. I think I'm just gonna leave this cap gray. I mean, the gray looks okay. I don't need any special color for that. And no, I might use the darker gray for it. That might be more interesting. It'll create more contrast when it sits on top of the fuel tank. Yeah, this color looks about right for me. Okay, so now I'm going to paint a slight highlight on top of the fuel cap there, just to make it look a little bit more interesting. And then paint a slight highlight around the edges of the cap. And going around the circle as well. I'm doing it twice because it wasn't really strong enough the first time. Okay, and now the tricky part, I gotta sort of eyeball where I think the ambient occlusion for the cap on the fuel tank would be. I'm actually duplicating the layer so I can just move it around if necessary. And set this to 100%, set it to normal, and then just create this black dot. I think it's going to be about there. It's in the center, so all I have to do is move it left to right, but the only way to be sure is to save it and check it in Max. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be wrong. There we go. It's really quite off, so I have to move it around. It's more that way. I'm trying to count. I'm trying to see if it's in between an edge, or it looks like it's exactly on an edge. So it's loading again, and there we go. Looks like I got that right. Maybe it needs to move slightly, but I don't think so. Yeah, there we go. A slight movement. Save it again. That looks perfect. I mean, look at that. We saved ourselves all the trouble of painting ambient occlusion, of baking ambient occlusion by just painting it. Sometimes I really prefer to just do it manually. You know, when I just got started with 3D, I didn't even know about baking lights. So once I painted the entire ambient occlusion of a car by hand, how things have changed since then. Alright, with that done, I think we can put these ambient occlusion layers behind us and start adding some more dirt and detail to the fuel tank. Yeah, you have to watch out with the opacities of these layers when you merge them down. If you merge down a layer, if you merge two layers and one has a different opacity than 100%, that sort of opacity gets baked into the final layer. So you want to set everything to 100 before you start merging them. Okay, so look at that fuel tank. It's totally boring. I mean, we gotta add some detail there to spice it up. It looks like pure solid colors. That really can't happen. Okay, so I'm thinking right now what I should do about that. And let's see what layers we have here. Fuel drips. Here's one thing I learned from a previous car, and I actually got this from reference. The car had this sort of matte paint, which was done with spray cans, and you could really clearly see that the owner had many times he had spilt fuel when he was fueling his car, so you could actually see drips of fuel had discolored the paint on the car. So that's exactly what I'm going to do here. I mean, I bet this car was used when I don't know, the owner was drunk, he was in a hurry, he was being chased by whatever, mutants or something, so we had to hurry fueling and a few drops were spilled. So that's why we're adding these drips to the car. Now I have these splatter brushes. Splatter brushes are always interesting for this sort of stuff. And I'm just applying them on top at different opacities. It's really important that you don't use a single opacity. You want them to be in varying opacities. Some really light, some are a little bit more obvious. It depends on how the fuel dried onto the car, how much was spilled. It just makes it look more interesting. Yeah, I like this one. I just gotta rotate it a little bit. It looks like the drips like really went down the entire tank. That looks pretty good. And just placing them and seeing if I like where they're going. Another drip that went down. This guy was really sloppy with his fuel. And I'm really making sure that the repetition isn't showing too much here. I mean, these texture details are going to be what make the fuel tank interesting to look at, because in the end it's just a plain aluminium tank. Alright, so I have my drips here. I'm putting them into my specular, and in my specular I want them to be really dark so that you can really see the difference. Okay, so I'm saving these. And back to Max to have a look at them. And that looks pretty cool if you ask me. I'm really liking this. It's really added a lot to the tank. I love these splatters around there. That was definitely a good move. So here's another tip. When you're doing your textures, think about how the owner or how these, think about some original ways to wear things down, like that show use, that show that people have interacted with it, that show that this thing has a history. And splatters and drips are always a nice way to do this. Just make sure you put them in a logical place. It wouldn't make sense to do this on, I don't know, the engine or the underside of the car or whatever. Okay, so we gotta work on a next part. Right now I'm just checking out what might need some more work. And what we're going to do is slight delay here. We're going to create the glossiness map because I think the specular and the diffuse have evolved enough for me to warrant creating a glossiness map. Now, a lot of people have trouble with the glossiness map. They can't imagine what it's for or why they would want to create it. It's really not that difficult to create a glossiness map. A glossiness map is just, it's way simpler than a specular map. A specular map is harder to create, but a glossiness map has to interact with your specular map. In short, a glossiness map are just really simple, wide, dark or bright spots that indicate if the speculars are sharp or dull. So if you have shiny metal, you want to have bright white values in your glossiness. If you have dull plastic or dull rubber, then you want to have dark black areas in your glossiness. But you have to make sure that these interact with your specular map. But as I said, you don't have to add all the dirt that you created in your specular into your glossiness. It's really not necessary. You can just get away with big bright areas in the same color, just solid spots. So right now all I'm doing is I'm going over certain areas and thinking what they should be. For example, the fuel tank, which you can see is quite a bright color, is because I want it to have sharper reflections. I want it to be like shiny metal. If you compare that to the dark area you see at the left for the differential at the underside of the car, that's a really dirty, worn part with blurry paint. So I want the speculars to be really blurry there. So also I'm overlaying the ambient occlusion here, but I'm probably not going to keep that until the end because the ambient occlusion is only there for me to tell what area is what. Ambient occlusion to me is more clear than using my UV overlays. It tells me more about what the exact part is. So as you can see, I made the brake discs, I made them shinier because brake discs are pretty shiny since they always get scraped and rubbed and by the brake pads that push against them. Same deal for the exhaust. The exhaust can be quite shiny. I mean, they should be shiny. And here's an exception for the metal on the fuel tank. I'm adding my dirt actually, since I want that to be way duller in reflections. I mean, it dulled out the metal, so the glossiness has to be different. And you can see I'm doing the same thing for the caked on burnt oil. Of course, that part is going to be way blurrier and duller in specular and reflections than the rest of the engine, so I'm adding that in kind of black. I'll be honest, this is a much more complex glossiness map than you would normally do, since this car has so many different types of metal, so many different types of dirt that's on it. If you're making a simpler prop, then you probably would just get away with solid colors. For example, I made a gun, a submachine gun, and that was really simple to create the glossiness for. I mean, I think there were 3 values or something, ridiculously easy. You can check it out on my website if you're curious. So at the top, the supercharger, the blower, of course I want that to be super shiny, so I gotta make that completely white. I know it's not completely white, but that's because the ambient occlusion is overlaid. So I can't forget to select every part that fits together. It's just a bit fiddly selecting all this stuff, but hey. Okay. And these are the parts for the windshield sides, so they also have to be chromy. Same for the lights. I really want the lights to be bright. I'm not making things too complex. I think I have about 4 values here. I have white, gray, and black, or dark gray in there, just for 3 different steps. So really, you're just really thinking about what sort of material do I want to represent. Is this going to be like dull metal? Is this going to be bright metal? Just keep that in mind when you're selecting the colors and creating the glossiness map. So for my first version, let me just save that. And I haven't used it yet, so I've got to open the glossiness, turn it on. And of course, you got to set the minimum and maximum levels. You got to tell what glossiness level the white is and what glossiness level the dark is. It makes a subtle difference, but it's really worth the effort, I'd say. Glossiness level of 50. Yeah, that looks pretty interesting. You can see there's still specular on the spots, for example. It's just different. It really helps tell the materials apart. I like how there's a difference between the blower and the rest of the engine. That rear differential, that also looks pretty good. Okay, maybe it needs a few more tweaks. But all in all, I think the glossiness map is has definitely made a difference here. Alright, let's see what we can still do here. Yeah, one thing you need to create as well, the glossiness is okay, I just want to take it to the next step. Like I did for the wheels, we want to do the reflection map. Some parts I want to give chrome-like reflections, like real reflections, while some parts I want to keep duller. You gotta see this reflection map as a sort of extra step on your glossiness. If you have dull stuff, you can have dull stuff with sharp speculars, but you don't want to have reflections on them. But some stuff you just want to give those reflections to totally boost them and make them look really cool. So I've got this reflect map here. Not going to use the complete map anymore, just going to use the reflect. And then select my cube map. Turn on cube map reflection. There you can see that some parts are starting to reflect, like the grille in the front, the top of the supercharger, but not the engine, which is really helping to bring things apart. Also, I'm tweaking the shader settings a bit here, the exact amount of blur for the reflections, changing the multipliers, etc. This is really just how the shader works with the textures. These are subtleties that really don't work for everything. I mean, it can be different in this engine, it can be different if you use another shader. These things can be really different, but for this case, I'm just working with my shader and I want things to look as good as they can. So that's what I'm tweaking right here. There's a little spot I forgot there, which is the growl for the front of the car. Needs to be brighter in reflections. I'm gonna say that again. Yeah, the exhausts weren't really showing up enough. Saving the gloss again. convinced by those exhausts yet. And this fuel tank's reflections also need to be better. I think I'm gonna give the fuel tank some slight reflections. Like not as bright as the chromey stuff, but still some. It's not really showing all that much. Just selecting them and making it a little bit brighter. I think I just might need to change the shader settings a bit, since it's not really showing that much. The bias settings aren't showing up. Yeah, that's better. You get this slight hint of reflection that really helps sell the aluminium look on it. Okay. I think for the reflection map, we're almost there. What you can do is also have the gloss map control the reflection blurriness, so which is a nice feature, but you just gotta make sure to set everything right then. And as it stands, I've actually updated this setting in my shader to work better, so if you get the latest version, it should work better. Anyway, that's about it. See you in the next video, guys. We should do another texture there, so it will be interesting.